Coming up in this episode.
Brain inflammation, that was my first symptom. The disease is incredibly volatile and versatile. So there's so many different symptoms, different issues. When I for a long time always said I had encephalitis of the brainstem, which is the first symptom. But that was really for a long time to confuse people, because I didn't want to say it's MS, because that of course has this huge stigma, like she's going to die.
People who I've known who've gone through divorce, or even just a breakup after a very long relationship, which I've been myself, is, you build a mythology together throughout your life. Your identity is tied with someone else's identity. Like for me right now, part of my identity is I'm a father and I'm a husband and I'm a business owner. Like, those three things, those are, things. So when you do go through that sort of process, then there's an identity crisis that can come about there.
And prevention in the Alzheimer's context is really the only way, because Alzheimer's is a highly individual, highly complex disease. And once that has manifested, there by now have been 100 patients that have returned from cognitive impairment to cognitive function with a very intense one-to-one consultations with neurologists.
The Founders Unplugged podcast, hosted by Greg Mccallum. Raw, uncensored conversations with startup founders.
Martina, how are you?
Leo, I'm well. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Thanks for bearing with me. Bit of a nightmare. I spent the last hour fixing my PC and I've just managed to fix it.
It's funny that you say that, because an hour ago I just thought, I'm just going to real quick have a look if my camera is going to work. Because with Zoom, it always works. With Teams, sometimes Google Meet, usually. And of course, it didn't. So now I am very acquainted with all my fittings and stuff. So that was.
So really lovely to see you again. Thank you so much for being patient while I was getting all this stuff sorted out. So we've started a little later. But yeah, thanks for joining me. So like I mentioned, when we spoke way back when we were talking about doing this, it's just going to be a conversation, a chat. I'm not going to grill you. You're not in an interview, but there is one little bit of a thing I like to do at the beginning, which is about the only structure this entire show has, to be honest, which is just to ask my guests to introduce themselves and their business. And, and you can take as long or as short as you like. It can be an elevator pitch, or you can give me a full life story. I really don't mind. So I'll hand the spotlight over to you, as it were. And while you're doing that, I'll also share the screen and show your profile and website and so on. All right. So go ahead.
So shall I start?
Yes, go for it. Yeah.
And is this intro to you or to the audience?
To everyone listening and watching right now, because we're
Okay. So my name is Martina. I'm the founder of Viatitude Health, and it's a digital health tech. So that is going to be technology that will give the user tailored guidance on food and lifestyle choices to make to improve their brain health and to decrease their risk for Alzheimer's disease later in life. So that is my ultra pitch. I'm at quite an early stage. I'm running the first end user test right now, and with that collecting very interesting live data. That is of course always very different to running the idea by friends or other founders who love it, and then people that actually, so essentially how the user test is structured is really that while once the tool is how it is, it will be technology, an app where the user will get a push message once a week with this food and lifestyle guidance. As it is now, the user signs up via the website and then fills in their user profile, and they receive once a week an email with the guidance. And that is very interesting how people react to it, in that some things are very welcome, make a lot of sense, but of course many things are very different to conventional wisdom. That's so really the rule or the philosophy I follow is really functional medicine, which is all about supporting the function of the body with natural means. And that is not always what is conventional knowledge. So that is not something that your GP would ever tell you. So sometimes it's these whole like, why? How could that possibly work kind of conversation, which is incredibly interesting for me to see where people are and what, of course, my tool will need to cater for in terms of level of knowledge and what language, what narrative they need to be communicated with, so it makes sense for them, and so that they're willing to take on the guidance, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, because I imagine, well, we all have a certain amount of preconceived notions about our own health and about general health matters. So you're battling with that quite often, I imagine. When you mentioned, you sort of said a phrase there which I've not heard before, about that you're advising to tackle health through natural means or something. You just said,
Yeah.
was that it? Well, can you explain that a bit more? What do you mean by that?
Okay, so it's really the concept of functional medicine. So that's really a term that
Functional
was
medicine,
defined, in the US probably 20 years ago, and that is really the approach to human health, not necessarily opposite, but different to conventional health. So conventional medicine is looking at a patient, a human, looking at their symptoms, and then giving usually pharmaceutical interventions to manage the symptoms. And functional medicine is looking at the human, looking at their symptoms and working back on the patient's timeline, what happened to lead up to these symptoms, and then essentially working on eradicating whatever the root cause, the trigger of these symptoms was, and then for the future supporting the human back to health, back to function. So, and that is really the approach of the app. The reason really is that Alzheimer's, we probably have all heard about. On the one hand, it's a huge global epidemic, and on the other hand, there are a few medications that have terrible health safety records. It's a very inflammatory topic, so I'm not going to get into that too much. But realistically, there is no drug that actually prevents or cures Alzheimer's. And at the same time, there is so much knowledge about showing that Alzheimer's is preventable to quite a great extent, 40% of cases, with the right food and lifestyle interventions. And by now, it's all over the papers, mass media, Daily Mail, Telegraph, Times, everywhere. Alzheimer's is preventable with food and lifestyle. And you read the article, and it just says, don't smoke, don't be fat, don't be stupid, you'll be fine. And of course, that's not, that is not the guidance that people need to actually know, what does that mean for me? And of course, every human is different. So we all have different risk factors. So while we live in a world that simply is making brain healthy life difficult simply by the foods we eat, the air we breathe, the sedentary lifestyle, so many things. But there are greater risks that we all have, different ones that need to be addressed first. And that's really, my tool is tailored, not personalized, because personalized implies testing, incredibly expensive testing. And the idea really of the app is it's clear executable guidance, but it's absolutely accessible for all. It doesn't need any medical knowledge. It doesn't need any financial means to actually go through all this testing, see a neurologist, go through all this, and this whole question of, am I at risk? I would always argue we all are, simply by the fact that how we live in this modern world.
We exist, and therefore we are at risk,
Yeah. So it's not about scaring people, quite opposite, empowering people. That there is no reason to go through life fully expecting Alzheimer's is just an inevitable consequence of aging. Quite the opposite. It is our daily choices. With that, we can make our lives better. Not making that a stressy thing, as in, can I only eat cardboard because otherwise I'm going to kill myself and all that? Not at all. It's very much about this very positive, very optimistic message, as in, we can make such a hugely positive impact to our own lives, our own health, and the app is going to help with that. So that's really I think.
Yeah, and it's a great concept. And what's interesting though is the reason why I asked you to explain that term is because I thought that's what you meant by that, but it's just surprising to me that that's not considered a mainstream approach in medicine, because essentially what it sounds like you're describing is the approach of treating the symptoms versus treating the illness, the disease, right, the cause, which is it. I mean, that's a very common saying to say, we're treating the symptoms, not the cause, and that's considered a negative thing. So it's just kind of hard to hear in some ways that modern medicine doesn't take that as a standardized approach to do both, to manage pain and symptoms that are, that are causing, quality of life issues, but then also looking at a life and assessing that life and making recommendations based on that. I know that sometimes that happens, like with obesity, for example. It's like, okay, you're suffering from arthritis or diabetes, well, then you need to make these changes. But it's surprising to hear you say that it's not as common practice for everything, which is
I think that is really driven. Sorry to interrupt.
No. I think
I think that is really driven by the fact that, on the one hand, doctors just don't have time
right
to really sit with a patient for. I mean, if he's functional,
it's just so many patients. It's just like, yeah,
exactly. So it's lack of time, but also lack of knowledge. And if you look at how much time doctors in their education spend on nutritional science, what is it? 3 hours all over their whole stuff. So, and
is it a liability thing as well, to a degree, that the medical professionals are maybe concerned about making recommendations on a lifestyle basis because of, they could get sued,
I mean, the world we live in now, everybody is so scared of everything that this very basic sense of courage to tell a patient that is insulin resistant that there's a diet that will actually reverse insulin resistance and will prevent diabetes 2 from manifesting. That's a fact.
Yeah.
But that is not something that a doctor would be comfortable to tell their patients, because there will be some legal team of a big pharmaceutical company potentially making their life hell. And that is really the big problem. So you probably know that the reason for starting this project is really my personal story that I have had.
Yes, which I do want to ask you to recount to me, because it was but feel free to delve into that if it's appropriate.
Yeah, so essentially the motivation for this project is really my own experience. I always differentiate between my old life and my new life. In my old life, so I'm German. I came to London, to the UK, to have some work experience in finance here. And so my old life was very much driven by the done thing, everything, how it should be. I was married, but I was, it was already a long time ago. It was March 2004 that I fell ill, and it turned out I had an inflammation of the brain. And that was a time when the neurologist that I saw that did my brain scan simply said to me, "There's nothing I can do for you." And so that was, for me, then the decision. Once I had decided I wanted to live, I can tell you that was not fun months that followed. And then I literally started to read anything and everything, tried stuff out, because it was at that stage obvious there was no pharmaceutical intervention. It's essentially an autoimmune neurodegenerative disease. So neurodegeneration means your brain is progressively failing. And so I just read and tried stuff out, and I came across random things, and I had nothing to lose. So then 15 years later, my brain is working again. And suddenly the whole world makes sense again. And I then studied for an MSc in functional medicine, personalized nutrition, just to understand my illness, but also my return to function. And so that's really the basis of the passion for this project, to really understand how much knowledge is out there. But it is such a different paradigm, in the sense that functional medicine is not you go and see a doctor, you say, "I have this," the doctor says, "Take this pill, bye-bye." But functional medicine is very much about having quite a conversation, going into what actually happened, and taking a holistic view. So letting go of the concept holistic is just weird hippie homeopathy bullshit, but actually we are one system. That's just a pure rational approach to being human. So on that journey, I really realized that there's so much knowledge out there, and prevention in the Alzheimer's context is really the only way, because Alzheimer's is a highly individual, highly complex disease, and once that has manifested, there by now have been 100 patients that have returned from cognitive impairment to cognitive function with a very intense one-to-one consultations with neurologists, which are rare, these neurologists, and incredibly expensive. That's not attainable to all. But this illness is really a risk to all. And yeah, so on this journey, I realized there's so much data available, and we just need to make it accessible to people who don't necessarily have the courage and the confidence to go to PubMed.gov and read scientific papers and go through, that's me or that's not me, you know. So yeah, you can tell it's my passion. So I'm sorry if I'm waffling.
That's the idea. That's the idea. You waffle as much as you like. There's no problem. Yeah, well, I mean, I remember when you first told me that story, I was stunned by it. You know, it's such an incredible story. How many years did you say it took for you to get?
So diagnosis was 2004, and then by 2017, I was probably cognitively at a stage of full function. And I definitely had and still have a little bit of physical impairments. So my right side was very badly affected. But yeah, so it really took way over 10 years, just trial and error. And of course, if somebody would have given me an app like that, so my disease was not dementia, autoimmune, but the concept is very much the same, that to feed the right nutrients and avoid the inflammatory stuff. That is really the very fundamental concept. So if somebody would have had this magical app that I'm now developing for me, that would have taken me 3 months to get back to life.
Because a lot of the time you spent was actually doing the research. And I imagine while you're cognitively impaired, doing that research is even more difficult, right?
You know, it's so funny that only now that I'm thinking about it, that I'm talking about it in this whole founders context, and people ask me, so how were you able to do that? And I'm thinking, in hindsight, that was probably the one thing I focused my energy on. So everything else, I forgot. I forgot my pins. I lost stuff. I didn't make any sense anymore. I didn't understand the most fundamental concepts. But for some reason, well, of course, I didn't go through scientific papers beginning to end and figure out the statistic significance and all that, but it was very much abstract, introduction, conclusion, and then thinking, is that me? I'm going to try it out. You know, so it was nothing to lose. Let's go for it.
You weren't like absorbing huge amounts of data, and you were kind of looking at more the summarization of these papers. Very much
really looking for the actionable intervention, because I of course didn't have anyone to talk about this with either. You know, I was completely by myself. My husband was very supportive. He of course dealt with his own stuff, and so he gave me the time and space, if you will, to do that. But I was completely by myself. I was trying out anything and everything, and obviously nothing killed me. And of course now I have very much this approach, looking at something, is that reasonable? Does it make sense? Is there data showing toxicity? Is there data showing what is the upper tolerable limit, whatever nutrient it is, and then really going for it and very much applying my commonsensical approach in combination with what I learned in my MSc to not go completely rogue. But of course back then it was just me. I only had responsibility for myself. It was not that I was giving guidance to anyone else. So it was not that I was thinking I might kill people. But it was just, you know, nothing to lose and trying stuff out.
Yeah. By the way, your internet connection is a little unstable. That you're cutting out every now and then, not too often, but just a little bit. So I don't know if you've got another network you want to try or anything, but just to let you know. But don't worry about it too much. If not, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine. It's up to you. It's a little bit. If it's easy for you to switch to another network or something, great. But otherwise, don't worry about it. So you mentioned that, you know, what were the things that you were doing then? What lifestyle changes did you make? I mean, I'm assuming you didn't have a particularly unhealthy lifestyle prior to this. Hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I lost you there for a moment. Sorry.
No worries. So no, I was just asking, what sort of changes did you make, and what sort of data did you gather, and what was this? Was it predominantly dietary? Were there some unhealthy habits that you had prior that you decided to kick? What did that all look like?
Am I back?
Yes, you are.
So yeah, you're asking what changes I made. So it was really I mean, in hindsight, it was, but of course that took me a long time to figure it out. In hindsight, it was gluten, dairy, and egg. These 3 food proteins that were upregulating my immunity. Really, the mechanism is that my immune system was simply mistaking the gluten protein, the casein protein, so that is from milk, and both egg white and egg yolk, mistaking that for a foreign invader. And so autoimmunity is really the concept. If you think of a war, this complete chaos and friendly fire, where troops attack their own troops because they cannot even differentiate anymore. And so that's really what autoimmunity is, that I was constantly eating gluten, dairy, and egg, and my small intestine couldn't actually deal with it. So it all ended up in my bloodstream. So the small intestine being the place where nutrients should get into the bloodstream. But if the small intestine is a bit injured, if you will, too much gets into the bloodstream. And that's really when this constantly upregulates its immunity and inflammation and inflammatory process starts. So so in hindsight, if I would have right away figured out gluten, dairy, and egg to avoid, to have to increase my vitamin D level, that was depleted to an extent. It was almost non-existent. And vitamin D is such a hugely important factor in neurological health, but also immunity and bone health and really everything. So I would probably say in hindsight, it was really foods to avoid, foods to eat, nutrients to replenish, and probably my microbiome, a huge topic as well. That was very much affected by many years of antibiotics, and that, of course, I think by now the term gut-brain connection is quite well known. And in autoimmunity and anything brain-related, the microbiome is likely quite badly affected and usually overgrown with pathogens. So then to remove pathogens and to replenish probiotics. And that was also quite an interesting journey. But yeah, so in hindsight, it was really just a few things to do. And of course, exercise. That is only something that very recently I started, because I didn't have the confidence, and I didn't think I could actually move. But I broke my ankle only in summer 2021, I want to say. So back here, that's my X-ray, and right. that was the trigger for me to go to the gym, and that was another huge paradigm change in terms of building muscle, building strength, which is hugely important for the brain as well. So yeah, in the beginning, when I simply didn't have any ability, if that makes any sense, it was very much food and nutrient focused, and then progressively focusing on sleep. Of course, the stress level was not work stress, but life stress, as in where is it going? And now exercise. So it's a very much an all-in situation.
Yeah, the way, like you mentioned, very holistic, right? But so you mentioned about gluten, dairy, and eggs there. And as it relates to the small intestine, so did you have prior issues with your small intestine, or is this something that could happen to anyone who eats excessive amounts of gluten, dairy, and eggs, in your opinion?
So I guess first of all, it's very individual. So everybody will have their own food proteins that they're intolerant to. My personal opinion is gluten and dairy is likely not good for any human, but that is a very inflammatory statement to make, so I will deny ever having said that. It's a very
but I'm hearing that increasingly more and more from people, from even medical professionals now, saying, if you're going to eat it, at least really make it a small, very, very small part of your diet overall.
Yeah. I'm always very happy to hear that, because and the interesting thing with nutrition is really it's a very black and white world. People want to be right. People want to tell you, do that, do that.
It's not that simple.
And it never is that simple. But to your question, so egg is a personal thing for me. And I would say anyone who tolerates egg well, it's the most magical food. It's high in the best
I'm
fats.
so glad you said that, because I was very concerned that I would have to miss out on eggs. I love eggs.
It is the perfect
and nutritionally amazing, right?
I mean, that is the one thing that I miss from my diet. But gluten and dairy, that is really, I mean, I'm not starving, and especially the UK has this amazing this whole food industry, if you will, of young progressive businesses that produce high quality organic wonderfulness that is so tasty, and without gluten, without dairy, so many things I can eat. And whenever people say like, oh my God, eat, and I'm always like, I look like I'm starving.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. We've got a lot of also amazing startups doing incredible things in terms of food, like you said. So yeah, super interesting. It reminds me a lot as well, especially you mentioned about the gut biome thing, which I'm interested to explore a bit as well. You remind me of a recent episode I recorded. It hasn't been released yet, with a wonderful lady by the name of Viatitude who spent many years in the medical profession doing amazing things, working on cancer treatments. She actually developed a cancer treatment, and her story is fascinating. I strongly recommend when that episode comes out, you listen to it, because her journey is incredible, and another very inspirational woman like yourself, in my opinion. I might even introduce you actually at some point, because I think you should speak. You'd get along. I think you're a lot of similar things. So she worked on the cancer. She worked on cancer treatments. She developed a cancer treatment, a very unique one, and then very ironically, she found out that she had the exact cancer she was working on treating. And she decided to change her entire lifestyle. Obviously, she was fortunate enough she could use her own treatment, but then which helped. But also a huge part of what she did was change her diet, an enormous part, or lifestyle as a whole, but diet especially. And the big thing for her was cutting out glucose, sugar, gone, because of the essentially that's food for cancer, which I didn't know until I spoke to her. And carbohydrates as a whole, right? Sugars as a whole. So this was something she was explaining to me, and her startup is, you wouldn't believe what it is. She's created a chocolate company. Sugar-free chocolate, and the best tasting sugar-free chocolate is sinless treats. So it's called, sinless treats. Because she loved chocolate, and then suddenly she couldn't have it, and she was eating all of these sugar-free chocolates, and she was like, oh, these are shit. I can do better. So she took a scientific approach to it from a chemistry perspective, and she's like the Willy Wonka. Incredible woman. So I'll definitely introduce you, but it reminded me of that because of the reason why is because the journey, similarities, but also because we spoke for 2 hours like we're going to do as well, and by the end of it she said we didn't even have time to talk about the gut biome, which is another enormous factor. And what I wanted to say to that was and ask her about was the fact that I hear a lot of information in relation to, I watch some things on YouTube by doctors and so on, and they talk a lot about how the body is very good at self-regulating a lot of those sort of things. So what have you learned in your sort of research on this journey about the gut biome in relation to that? You mentioned obviously that taking antibiotics can affect it, but doesn't the body bounce back by itself, provided you're living a fairly healthy lifestyle, or does it need a bit of a push, especially when it comes to the gut biome side of things?
I would probably say the world we live in is a place where nothing naturally bounces back anymore. That is really that really makes it just incredibly difficult. And only our grandparents lived in a completely different world in terms of all the toxins that we're now surrounded by, and not just glyphosate, but anything and everything. And that really is very specifically really attacking, destroying the microbes in our gut microbiome. But there are so many other factors as well that really make it incredibly difficult. In my case, and that's not unusual at all, I was born by cesarean. I was not breastfed, and that is the start of the microbiome. So any infant will receive the mother's microbiome if they're born naturally. And
what happens during that process that's different from cesarean?
Because the mother's microbiome is transferred to the child, into the child's orifices, when the child goes through the vaginal canal.
Right, okay, interesting.
So a fetus is completely sterile in the uterus, and only in the process of birth they will have their microbiome inoculated. So being born by cesarean means I was born sterile, and there's the saying by the neurologists that have worked on the microbiome, a baby that is born by cesarean, they start their life with a microbiome that is the stuff that's stuck to the surgeon's hands.
Right.
And that is not a healthy, varied microbiome. And the next step to receive more commensal bacteria is really breast milk. And I wasn't breastfed either. So that was the start, which was challenging. Of course, I mean, that was a long time ago, so nobody really talked about that, knew about that. And then over my life, lots of antibiotics. And that, of course, they take out the commensal bacteria, and with that give so much room for pathogens to overgrow. And so it was kind of an accumulation of really unfortunate events. But to your question, why doesn't the microbiome really, why doesn't it just bounce back? I think everybody's different. That's, of course, the one thing to always keep in mind. And certain nutritions are incredibly helpful for supporting the microbiome, being that yogurt, fermented foods like kimchi, apple cider vinegar, so many things that can naturally support the microbiome. But so many people have a diet that includes heavily processed foods, where really problematic substances are really taken in on a daily basis. And when I say problematic substances, various substances that are supposed to improve the texture of food, the look, the of course the ability to retain freshness, you know, and all these things can have a very strong negative impact on the microbiome. So I always find it very interesting to look at the macro picture of nations where levels of health are different to the classic Western world. I mean, the US with the standard American diet, they of course are the extreme end of human destruction, if you will. But then other nations that have a much more natural, old school way of living, much closer to how our grandparents lived, they have a different level of illness. And then, of course, Japan is an incredibly interesting place where certain illnesses are very, very rare that are very common in the West. So in Japan, fermented foods like kimchi, like probiotics, fermented soy, I mean, that's a food that's kind of a, you know, acquired taste, natto. I heard that it smells like the devil himself.
I have tried it before. It is the most horrendous thing I think I've ever eaten in my life.
That's what I heard. But that is apparently magical for the microbiome.
Right, yeah, makes sense.
So, yeah.
It's funny, I after speaking with Beata, because we spoke about food as well, obviously, a lot, and I had this thought in the days afterwards that's kind of stuck with me, that supermarkets are all wrong, right? Not only because of the fact that they stock processed food, number one, like removing that, even if they didn't stock processed foods, they're all laid out wrong. They shouldn't be aisles that say fruit and veg and meat and dairy, etc. They should be organized based on the health benefits according to the body, and there should be a certain amount of guidance as when you're within a supermarket. I personally envisage this as the future of shopping, right? You know, where maybe we've got an app or something and you're going around and you're fulfilling all the needs of your body. based on your shopping process. So your shopping isn't like, I need bread, I need milk, I need these things. Instead, it's you're fulfilling all the needs, your monthly dietary requirements for your full body function as you shop, and you don't finish your shop until you've ticked all those boxes. And that's how shopping should be. You know what I mean? Like, in my opinion, the app will say you haven't purchased anything to help support your immune system or your gut, health or something like that. That's what it should be like. It boggles my mind that we haven't got there yet, but maybe we will one day.
Yeah, I hope so. But I think there are, of course, corporate interests that don't quite align with that.
Right.
And at the same time, if you look at the foods that are really cheap and that are really affordable, are the worst ones. I mean, if you only look at the aisles of breakfast cereals, there are no words for that. I mean, it's just horrificness beginning to end. And in that context, I mean, sooner or later, when you speak with me, sooner or later, I will always say something terribly unsavory, because that's just how I am.
Good. Me too.
So,
I say a lot of things that piss people off. I don't give a shit. Like, I'm sorry, I don't.
That's why we're friends.
Yeah.
So essentially, why it's just so completely normalized to have breakfast cereals, cornflakes, or all these Fruit Loops, all these things. Which is, of course, complete artificial food that didn't exist with our grandparents, and that apparently, and I think that's more than an urban myth, because I think it's just too genius to make it up. And that was really a product started by Kellogg himself, who had this beautiful thought that little boys masturbate too much. We need to stop them from doing that. And what is the best way to stop anyone to have any sort of sex drive? That is to reduce their testosterone. So breakfast cereals, any cereal reduces testosterone. So now Mr. Kellogg has achieved his goal. If you look at the global testosterone levels, how they have dropped over the last 50 years, it's not even funny anymore. But I just love it so much to think that he was sitting in his office and thinking like, these little
evil
boys,
genius. Yeah.
They're having too much fun. I think like this is not how God intended. And to then
I think I'd heard that before. I'd also heard that essentially breakfast wasn't considered a standard part of a daily routine until really Kellogg's came along. And before that, people just ate when they were hungry. Like if they woke up and they were like, oh, I'm a bit hungry, then they would eat something, but they would usually be, a more traditional breakfast. Like, they might fry some eggs and some meats and, maybe use some leftovers in the fridge from dinner or something like that. That's what they would eat, vegetables, fruit, things like that. But, Kellogg's, from what I understand, the history of that, it was more of a surplus product issue, where he had a lot of surplus product and was just like, I need to do something with this. What can we do with it? I think it may have even been part of a waste product even, if memory serves. I can't quite remember. Something that wasn't selling anyway, and was just like, let's make another product line. But I think that rings a bell, what you said as well about that. That might be a bit of an old wives' tale, but that's interesting. So what component of that, of something like a breakfast cereal could in any way affect testosterone? Is that just the increase in carbohydrates? Or how is
I would say it's definitely sugar intake. Sugar is inflammatory. That is the first thing.
But Kellogg's cornflakes were sugar-free products originally.
Carbs will convert into sugar.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
So very quickly. And of course, anything with cereals, with grains, contains glutinous proteins. These are again inflammatory, and I guess the testosterone pathways. That is, the whole hormone cascade is incredibly complex. But now thinking about that, essentially, what might be specifically reducing testosterone? Possibly, and pathway definitely is the inflammatory pathway, but also, you may have heard about that in ancient Rome, the slaves were fed grains, so the cheapest food ever, and so that fattens them up and gives them energy quickly, doesn't last long, but quick energy, and then refeeding constantly with cheap stuff. So I think possibly it is also the sense of loss of energy. I cannot tell you exactly what the pathway is or the mechanism is that reduces testosterone in this context. I should look that up now.
Yeah,
now
it'd be interesting to know.
Yeah,
because I mean, that's my understanding of that sort of biochemistry is quite a modern discovery in a lot of ways, anyway. So I can't imagine that a guy who owns a farm full of grain would necessarily know that. So there's maybe not a lot of truth in that, but it's an interesting story anyway, because apparently he was a bit of a religious fanatic. So it's worrying, isn't it? The amount, the effects that a lot of these foods that because of when we think about grains, especially, that these things were produced en masse predominantly to feed cattle initially, right? As human beings become settlers, the agriculture was predominantly around animal produce, right? That was the original sort of main objective, was, well, we need our meat to be closer. We can't keep chasing it around all the fucking time. That's not very conducive. So they just brought it in, and then, well, we need now a sustainable food source for them. And then the byproduct of that was, hey, this is also something else we can eat on a larger scale too. But of course, the main purpose of that is, like you pointed out, to feel full. The nutritional value isn't quite there. So it's useful for a society who is going through hard times, who can't necessarily afford to eat fresh meat all the time and so on, to have a substitute in order to have a full belly, especially if you've got a poorer part of your society. But it's kind of obvious when you think about it. It's just a substitute for feeling full. It's not a nutritional substitute. So it's no wonder a lot of medical professionals, including yourself, are coming out and saying things like this. Non-surprising. So tell me about what were you doing prior to all of this? You touched on that very briefly right at the beginning. What were you doing prior to your diagnosis and sort of going on this journey?
It was really that. So coming to London, that was my first job. So that was in 2001. I had studied finance, and I came here for a job in investment banking. And so at that stage, I was a very normal German, doing the German thing, doing the right thing, doing what was expected of me, Right. So as you can tell, I'm a very, very different person now.
Yes.
So that was really, and when I fell ill, I had just been here for just a very few years. And that was a very drastic change, of course, in my life, that I was very acute. So the symptoms of brain inflammation for me were double vision, but also loss of balance, loss of energy very drastically. My energy levels dropped very much, and then progressively with illness, my now the term brain fog is quite common. So it was very, very foggy sense, inability to concentrate, inability to focus, to really think things through, and at the same time, my physical strength just reduced. And so that was really before. So that was really before my illness, and then I worked for a few more years, and then it just wasn't possible anymore. It was just not making any sense anymore. And then it did not work for quite a few years, and I just focused on trying to come back to life somehow. And so then the switch to studying a completely different field and now doing something entirely different. So I always refer to my old life and my new life. And that really, my new life really started once I left banking. So I had quite a big break in terms of when I did not work at all. And then I joined another bank with a much less demanding, much less stressy job, just really to have structure in my day, which is so important. But when I left that at the end of 2018, and then I started to study, and since then I'm a completely different person, in that my brain is properly working now. And of course that coincided with my divorce. So I just had to be an individual again. There was not anyone there 24/7 who took care of me, but I just had to do stuff physically and mentally. And it was not a fun time, I can tell you that. But in hindsight, it was the best thing that happened, because if I wouldn't have been forced to really restart my life, become an individual, really figure things out by myself.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like and subscribe with notifications turned on.
I never would have. Without brute force, this sort of change couldn't have happened. So that's now where I am now. And while things are very different and certainly not any easier, in the sense that I'm sure you know very well, working by yourself, it's a lonely business. It's incredibly tough to achieve things if you're not in a team where people are there. So you're constantly trying to get people on board, trying to make things happen. But at the same time, it is, for me, such a magical experience to be in a place where I connect with people now, which I never did in my old life. That was entirely based on who do you work for, which transactions are you working on, who are you, which car do you drive, to now, what's your startup, what's your passion, what's happening, what are you interested in, how do you spend your spare time? And so actual people and actual conversations and actual connections, and to have conversations, just super short conversations with people. And of course, Alzheimer's is a topic that pretty much everybody's affected by. People immediately tell me, my grandfather, my grandmother, I am scared because I have been told I have this one gene variant, whatever it is. And suddenly to have from 0 to 100 meaningful conversations with people, that to me is still magical.
Yeah, I mean, and I totally agree with you on that last point about the magic of human connection. To be honest, it's one of the main reasons why I do this, because if it's because it's you know, it's like you said, for all the reasons you mentioned, you know, running your own business can be quite a solitary experience, you know, very demanding, and all the other things. And doing this is my therapy. You know, being able to speak with people and learn about people honestly, it's fantastic. And I learn a lot, not only about the individual, you know, and I find people fascinating like yourself, but also I learn a lot about the topics, you know, so, you know, from you and so on. So yeah, I totally see that. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot. It sounds like a lot, you know. A divorce in of itself as well, you know, just even that experience is a very transformative experience for a lot of people. I mean, you know, how long were you married for?
Well, he proposed a week, I was diagnosed with brain inflammation. Right, so that was very much a response. Now that I understand the demons he fought with, he had an issue with his family, so he felt that he had to take care of somebody else that made him valuable as a person. I don't want to say anything bad about him. He was such a huge part of my whole healing journey, so he's dealing with his own stuff. But of course, yeah, divorce is not great. No,
of course not. And what I was kind of getting at there is, you know, what's so transformative about that for a lot of people who I've known who've gone through divorce, or even just a breakup after a very long relationship, which I've been myself, is, you know, you build a mythology together throughout your life. Your identity is tied with someone else's identity, essentially. So you don't, you know, you share an identity. Especially if you have children and you've built a home and so on, you know, that identity is very much, you know, I am, like, for me right now, you know, part of my identity is I'm a father and I'm a husband and I'm a business owner. Like, you know, those three things, those are, you know, things. So when you do go through that sort of process, then there's an identity crisis that can come about there, and a rediscovery. And so not only you doing that by itself is an incredibly, you know, admirable thing to come out the side of in a positive way, but also through your medical you know, challenges as well. So yeah, what was the official diagnosis, if there was one? Because you mentioned obviously brain inflammation. Is that what it is, or is there
that's just a symptom. So so essentially now I live in the UK. Here people are not being judged and sidelined for having chronic illness. In Germany, I would be on the I would just be a non-human anymore. So
Really?
my illness is a very serious illness. It's MS, multiple sclerosis.
Right.
And brain inflammation, that was my first symptom. The disease is incredibly volatile and versatile, so there's so many different symptoms, different issues. That was my first tangible symptom. In hindsight, I had over the years so many small things, loss of sensation, loss of strength. Of course, in hindsight, I could never say what the mechanism was. But so when I for a long time always said I had encephalitis of the brainstem, which is the first symptom. But that was really for a long time to confuse people, because I didn't want to say it's MS, because that of course has this huge stigma, like she's going to die, you know, and she's disabled. And that is something that I now carry as a badge of, if that makes any sense. I can say I have this disease, I will have it forever, but if I make the right choices every day, I'm going to be fine. And I firmly know that I'm going to be fine. And there are a few other people in the world that have MS that are managing it entirely with food and lifestyle. And of course, one of them, Terry Walls, has written a book. It was a huge inspiration for me to understand, to simply have the courage to do that, to have the courage to defend it against other people who only want your best. They want to send you to the best doctor there is, where you can say like, no, the best one will kill me just like the worst one would. I have to do that myself. Yeah, so that was really my journey, to only be able to talk about it, to acknowledge it. In the UK. In Germany, I still very much deal in a very cagey way, because I would be judged, as in, why is she not in a wheelchair? Or even to the extent that I would probably say some people that are kind of close to me in a family context, I don't think they ever believed me that I was ill. So that it's very, very fixed-minded.
Because the symptoms weren't as obvious compared to other cases of more severe MS.
Well, I fell ill here.
Right, so they didn't see a lot of...
Nobody really saw anything other than my husband. He saw the whole thing, and that was in itself probably traumatizing. So, but of course now, if you would see me walk, when I have done a million things, I might likely limp with my right leg, or if I'm having a super stressy time, handwriting looks like that of a 5-year-old. But if I'm all good and all happy and I haven't eaten anything that was not a good idea, I have the neatest handwriting. I walk like not really like a ballet dancer, but you know what I mean. So, but it is much about outlook and being around people that don't judge me, and being around people that don't treat me like, ew, you're a weirdo. But no, and that is the amazing thing about being in the UK, that people here have a different mindset to how people deal with adversity. Had it so many times that in my new life, so I'm now doing everything by myself, and there are certain things I love doing. I love music, so I go clubbing, and every now and then when I really don't feel like talking to somebody, and if people think, oh, so what's wrong with you? And usually I say I have a broken ankle, which shuts people up. But sometimes people are more inquisitive in this really not nice way. And then I say, I have brain damage. And the other day somebody said to me, me too. How magical is that?
Yeah.
Where nobody just tries to pretend anything, and then we just sat in this place, and the DJ was amazing, and we just chatted about brain damage. And I thought that was just absolutely magical.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm very appreciative of the UK for its well, for a lot of reasons, and I defend it quite vigorously, especially mostly from people from the UK who complain about this country a lot, and I don't understand it. I think you really need to understand how lucky you are to be British and to live in this country, because my God, like compared to a lot of other countries, and just looking at a lot of the way we talk about our politicians and things like that. Yeah, okay, politicians can be slimy pieces of shit, but compared to a lot of other politicians around the world, we could be doing a lot worse. Yeah,
absolutely.
So what was I going to ask you? There's a million things I want to ask you, so I'm getting more confused in my head. So going back to the journey and where was I going with this? Yes. So jumping forward to now then. So you've got your, that was what I was going to ask you just really quick before I jump to that. Why Alzheimer's then? Because if your diagnosis was MS and you're talking about, why did you, I understand there are some similarities there, but why didn't you want to maybe go with sort of making Viatitude focused, Viatitude focused on helping individuals with MS?
The interesting thing is any autoimmune condition has a whole plethora of pharmaceutical interventions. These are all immunosuppressant drugs. So that means that it is simply that the immune system of the patient is being suppressed. With that, the autoimmune reaction, of course, decreases, but the other underlying disease process is still there. And with that, I would get myself into a huge fight with any pharmaceutical industry company, and they would steamroll me. That would not.
So were you being prescribed a lot of medications, or maybe still are?
None at all. None at all.
Okay.
And the neurologist that did my brain scan, he was very old school. He was literally probably 70 years old, and he was from a time when there was simply no medication because it was absolutely accepted. There is no efficacious intervention for chronic illness with medication. And so that's from a time when neurologists would do diagnosis and adios. So that was all they could do. They could diagnose and then send the patient away. And luckily, I had one of those, because at that time, I could have been subscribed immunosuppressant drugs and I wouldn't have known any better, and I would have taken them and I wouldn't be here now.
And would that be the normal sort of situation? Yeah. So most people in your situation would be prescribed them.
Definitely. And I was so lucky that I wasn't. But that's really, on the one hand, while neurological autoimmune diseases are definitely on the rise, Alzheimer's is this global epidemic. And at the same time, what has appealed to me so much was that it is very much in the public domain. Alzheimer's is preventable with food and lifestyle, but while that is the general message, there is no structured way of actually accessing that information, actually making it actionable for people. And so that was really the reason. And I guess my big passion for Alzheimer's prevention happened with, I came across a certain mineral when I was researching for my dissertation. And that mineral is incredibly interesting, and I would always argue incredibly promising in the context of supporting prevention of Alzheimer's disease. And but of course there are no large-scale clinical trials because it's going to fund a mineral that can't be patented.
What is the mineral?
It's lithium.
Right.
It's the car battery stuff, but the reason really why I wrote my dissertation about that was really I came across so many pieces of observational data, so epidemiological data showing that in certain parts of the world where lithium is in the groundwater, so lithium is just a mineral like magnesium, manganese, it's just stuff in the soil and the groundwater, and in regions of the world there is more lithium in the soil. It all started with Texas, Sardinia, and of course Chile, Argentina, where the big lithium mines are. So it varies areas in the world where in communities where there's lithium in the tap water supply versus in very similar communities close by that have very similar socioeconomic structures without lithium in tap water. So it was showing that the level of suicide, homicide, addiction, violent behavior, and dementia is significantly lower in places where there's lithium in the groundwater. And with that, not just groundwater, but of course in vegetable, in anything you consume. And that's when I just thought, like, that is fascinating. And that's not just one place in the world, that is really in all places in the world. I think there are over 20 of these observational studies showing that very consistently. And that's really when I started to dive into that subject. And so in the functional medicine context, you would never look at pharmaceuticals. So the lithium that is given to bipolar patients, that is very, very high content of elemental lithium. And it's usually lithium carbonate or lithium chloride or one of those compounds. And these are considered pharmaceutical. And the compound lithium orotate is defined as a food supplement. It's orotic acid. So it's just a matter of how is that mineral bound. And so the food supplement lithium orotate, that is really what I looked into. And in very, very, very small doses, this has an amazing effect on certain pathways in the body. On the one hand, it is downregulating a certain kinase that is upregulated in all chronic diseases. And on the other hand, very specifically for the brain, it supports the production of BDNF, that's brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is brain food. And so I started researching for that dissertation a long time ago. And since then, I have been taking 5 milligrams of lithium every single day. And it has a hugely balancing effect on mood in these small amounts. I mean, 5 milligrams versus 360 for a bipolar patient. And of course, in 360, in that doses, bipolar patients have thyroid, kidney, gastrointestinal problems. But with 5 milligrams, this is what you would take in if you would live in an area where that is in groundwater. And so on that journey, I really realized there's so much information out there on Alzheimer's, while there is no efficacious prevention or cure in the pharmaceutical context, simply because the disease is incredibly diverse. No two Alzheimer's patients will be the same. There are 5 different types, and one patient will have it more than at least, usually more than 2. But that is, of course, patients or people that are patients already. And I always say, I don't want people to become patients. So to catch before anything manifests. And it was really the research journey to realize how much information is out there in this food and lifestyle context for brain health, specifically Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's is just this huge global market. And the huge economic cost, total economic cost, and total emotional cost to have a loved one with that disease is just insanity, if you will.
So how can you be certain a change is having an effect? Because you mentioned about the introduction of 5 milligrams of lithium. How can you be certain that that's having the effect that you think it has when you've also made so many other changes to your lifestyle? Like, that must be a very difficult thing to measure, right? I mean, the only real, I suppose, scientific way of approaching that is to only make one change every 6 months and then record that one small change. But of course, we don't do that as human beings. We make a lot of changes all at once in our lifestyle to complement each other. You know, like, I'm going to start going to the gym and eat healthy. And within that those 2 decisions, there's infinite amounts of detail. So how can you be certain of that? Or is it just a bit of a hunch, really, more than anything else?
It's very interesting to say that. For over the 15 years when I tried to come out of the darkness, I called myself my own clinical trial. Because of course, in the beginning, I just introduced new things one by one and saw what happened. Now I have a little protocol, if you will, of supplements or foods that I focus on to make have enough magnesium, and of course vitamin D and K, and so a few basic things. Yeah, as you say, how can I be sure that lithium actually makes a difference? And so on the one hand, I of course tried it out what happens if I take it for a week, then cut it out for a week? And of course, 1 week is not necessarily the scientific washout period, but
Of
just to
course.
see what happens. And I definitely notice in myself that if I run out, so I didn't order enough or I forgot, I definitely notice in myself. At the same time, of course, I could not call that a scientific approach to that.
Sure, that's
So
very much anecdotal sort of evidence. Right?
it's very much me.
Yeah.
I when I speak with friends that are interested in that, I always give them the papers to read, get to your own conclusion about that. Any food supplements freely available, so that is not anything with any problematic context, if you will. Of course, you could probably kill yourself with too much magnesium as well. But so it is very much that I try stuff on myself. I listen to myself, and I have so learned if something makes me feel better, if that is entirely based on positive thinking, on projection, on the placebo effect. If something makes me feel better, that's all good. I would probably say now, so if you would have met me 10 years ago, when I was probably, well, my darkest times were probably 2015, 16, versus now, you wouldn't necessarily realize that that's the same person as I'm. But of course, to your question, I cannot show you blood tests showing the progression, or all of is the MRI scan from when I was very ill. And I haven't done another MRI scan yet, considering that while it's not radiation, but it's still very, very strong magnetic field on the brain. So I'm thinking, while I'm very, very curious what my brain looks like now, I haven't that yet. But yeah, I'm absolutely with you. That's why I'm very, very careful with anything that doesn't have a very, very clear evidence-based. So everything that I'm using for my app is very clearly evidence-based, but anything else that is a little bit more, I call it dynamic, a little bit more progressive. I tell people about it, but very much with the very clear disclaimer, as in, read about it, get yourself comfortable with that. If you want to try it out, I have, but I would never give anyone guidance on doing something that that there's not objective data around. While we know that any clinical trial data is in itself oftentimes problematic, but I think that's really the one thing that the world is comfortable with at this stage, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it's very difficult with science as a whole, but especially medical data, to distinguish whether or not something is effective or not, because it's not that simple, is it? I mean, there's so many factors. You can never really have a true analysis of the introduction of a new chemical into a human body, because every human body's chemical makeup is slightly different, and there's so many other factors going on in that person's life that's going to contribute to the efficacy of it or not, right? So it's a very complex field, and which is why human beings seem to just focus on, like you made that example of opening a newspaper and just like drinking too much coffee can cause Alzheimer's. Like, that's the sort of stuff people just look at and go, okay, I understand that. That's easy for me to wrap my head around. Okay, I'll stop drinking so much coffee, or eating too many apples gives you cancer. Or there was a period throughout media where everything just fucking gave you cancer. So it's just like, but human beings are wired that way. We want things to be black and white sometimes. So yes, now your user test group. So let's talk about where you are now with things. So you've got a test group. How many are in that test group at the moment?
16 people.
16, okay. And so they're going through, like you said, a sort of a tailored, is this tailored to each individual, or is it's a program that you've developed as a whole?
No, it's really tailored to each individual. So how it works is really that the user will fill in their user profile, and then the user test is for 12 weeks. So, but of course, the app will be, especially the way it's envisaged, is really will be used for months at a time over the user's lifetime. Certainly not every single day forever, but whenever they feel like they want to get back into a certain routine. And of course, there will be new data emerging over time. So what we know now versus what we know in 3 years, we will know more at that time. So that's why the idea is really that the app will be reused over time. But back to your question, the user test is for 12 weeks. The user fills in the user profile that shows, and these are 30 very specific questions that give a good indication of where they stand on certain risk factors. And then based on their user profile, they receive a weekly message addressing risk factors in order of priority or severity. And with that, so then over these 12 weeks, they have received 12 messages. And the concept is really that where the structure of the message is, it is now email, but it will be in an app, a push message. And the structure is that says, based on your user profile, you are likely to have a risk in area A. Therefore, this week's new brain healthy habit is going to be addressing A with blah blah. And then the question, then a small paragraph why, small paragraph how, as to what to do, what not to do. And then the last paragraph is further resources where they can read up, so link to certain scientific papers, link to podcasts, link to different neurologists who are publishing on a certain topic. And it is very much, some people just want to go straight to how, tell me what to do. Don't care why. Some people go into every single detail and ask me in detail, why did I include this link to this paper and not that paper, and how does that work and why, so yeah, that's really the concept. And with that, it is 12 new habits that are being introduced that are ideally something for the long term for them to stick with, however long they feel comfortable with it. So I'm always trying to introduce very much the whole listen to yourself. Your body tells you what you need and what you don't need. The interesting thing for me is, of course, after usually 3, 4, 5 weeks, I get a response back as in, now I've done this for a little while, I feel so much better in a certain aspect of my life. Again, not scientific, it's not a clinical trial, but so that is really the high level approach. And tomorrow, my first user, the first user that signed up, that is going to be her 12th week. And so that is kind of the wave is coming to end now. And it is, it's so incredibly important to have real life data and not just friends find everything great, but actually then people saying like, so what does it mean? What do I have to do? And some people having this expectation something terrible is going to happen, or have very high resistance. I want to be healthy and happy forever, but I don't want to do anything for it. And then the realization, it's no big deal at all. It's nothing crazy at all. It's very simple, but it will have quite a significant impact on your life. So there is quite a lot of rethinking that I'm seeing that the users need to do. And some of them are friends or friends of friends, some are strangers. And that is very interesting to see different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different educational backgrounds, different areas in the UK where they live. So right now it's UK focused. And yeah, so lots and lots and lots of interesting insight from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's your what would you say is the ideal user profile here? Because I'm thinking about when you're describing this, the sort of journey for a user and all that. I think of what I often think to when we look at disruptive tech when it comes to lifestyle, which is the problem of time poverty, right? The general day-to-day person. I had this conversation a lot with people who are in sustainable tech, for example. Who are trying to have a positive impact on the environment and things like that. And the problem that I always come up with this is, I think a valid one, which is the vast majority of human beings need things to be quick and they need things to be cheap. and they need to be affordable. They don't have the time to invest in things, and a lot of people out there are just just managing to survive. They've got kids, they're trying to pay the rent, they keep the lights on, they're working 2 jobs, and that's why people make bad lifestyle choice decisions, like eating unhealthy foods and so on, because of it's what's available. So, and make the poor buying decisions because they have got no other options. So my question kind of is similar to that, in a sense of like, what is the ideal profile for someone to use this sort of thing? Because they have to have, I suppose, a certain amount of what's the word I'm looking for? Privilege, to a degree, in terms of being able to have time to spend on this, but also the means to make effective change within their lives, which could quite often be, not only time, but also money, right? To maybe be able to afford to change their dietary, or get that gym membership or whatever else. So how do you see that? Like, maybe you've got some thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. The funny thing is, it is monetarily a very small investment, in pretty much all these interventions. Time-wise, yes, a little bit. Mindset-wise, that's the biggest thing, really. So just to give you a few examples of interventions that are classic. So for example, I can see from a user profile, a person is of Caribbean descent, they live in the UK, they have an indoors job, they really don't want to be in nature. First things, of course, likelihood that they are vitamin D deficient is very high. So the first intervention will be get your levels tested, have supplementation of a certain level, aim for a certain blood serum level, and so on. Vitamin D supplements cost nothing. I mean, we're talking a £5 investment per month. And that is literally in the morning, morning coffee, vitamin D.
Yeah, but £5 could be a lot to some people. And that's kind of the point I'm making, like even the time, and this isn't, I'm not trying to discredit what you're doing or anything. I just want to explore this because, I really want to see these sort of technologies and these innovations be available to everyone. And I think what we quite often forget when we're building these solutions is that, £5 can be a huge amount of money to some people. Like that could be a week's shopping, like to some, I mean, not maybe these days, but you know what I mean? Like that could feed, one of their kids, for a couple of meals, and then even like the steps you said there about getting themselves their levels tested and these sort of things, like that takes time. That takes also a certain amount of knowledge. But I suppose I'm answering my own question in a way, which is that, well, those are the type of people that probably wouldn't even begin this journey in the first place. But that's also my point, which is, well, then what can we do to make these things more accessible? I suppose, is that something that maybe you would want to tackle a bit later on down the road? And that right now you're going to be looking at those who are in a position of a certain amount of privilege that they can actually begin this journey, right?
It's interesting that you say that. So first of all, the age group that I'm aiming for is 35 to 49, simply because Alzheimer's has an incredibly long lead time. So we both will already have some amyloid beta and possibly hyperphosphorylated tau in the brain.
Oh, shit.
That happens. But so that's why it's so important to now stop doing stupid things. And really step one is the user acquisition is really working through a B2B2C business model, and the initial B2B customers are private life insurers, private health insurers, corporate wellness programs, DNA labs, and so on. That will be paying the subscription to Viatitude and then giving that app for free to their members and clients. And that's stage one. And these are, as you say, people that are privileged enough to have the time to get in DNA and spend £5 per month. I absolutely see what you're saying, that £5 can be a problem for people, no question. But so the stage one is really these people that are privileged in the sense that they will be able to afford that. as small as these investments are, but also to have the ability to understand why this is so important for the brain, being that weight-bearing exercises or ensuring sleep in a certain way and having certain sleep hygiene protocol and all these things. But of course, the mid-long-term dream is to be able to provide that up to the NHS, to the primary caregiver, the GPs, who would give it to all their patients, and really make it accessible to all. And to, of course, it's a journey. I'm absolutely clear that people that have never really thought about what food and life do for brain health, and so some people are biohackers. They know everything. They do the most amazing things. They have a biological age is 20 years younger than their chronological age, for sure. But these people have likely a long-term healthy brain. But of course, what I would like to reach is really the general population that don't even know that there are so many things that they can very easily change to improve their heart health and with that their brain health, and so many small things. And the vitamin D intervention, and if it's a person who literally has no money at all and does not want to, but only to stop using sunscreen and to go out into daylight as much as possible, that really is a huge help.
There are always some free alternatives to it, to certain things, right? You can't afford a gym membership, just go and have a run. So there are always some things. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's interesting you mentioned the sort of the business model there, because I was going to ask about that, and that clarifies a lot of that too, because of being able to give access to people, as opposed to a sort of a direct to consumer model where you have to charge them for it. That definitely makes it a lot more accessible. But it's definitely going to be a strategy that, like you said, is going to be sort of have to work in waves. Bring it out to certain groups of individuals, sort of one at a time, as is often the case with these commercial strategies, as I well know, right? Given that's what I do for a living. So yeah, massively interesting. So what is the next step? You were saying you're currently entering into a phase of. Oh, by the way, do you need to have a quick break or anything, or are you okay to carry on?
I'm okay. Surprisingly.
Okay. Good. So you're now sort of winding down this first user test phase. So what's the next step? What's happening after that?
And so it's really that there will be another user test. Definitely all the learnings from the first one. So I am now, I've been with Eagle Labs, the incubator. I've been invited to demo day in mid October. So that's time to meet investors as well. And really raising funding for the MVP is really the next big step. I've been starting to speak with very loosely with angel investors just to get their thoughts on anything from the pitch deck to the classic questions, as in, what you really need is people that look at it very seriously and say, right away, I don't like this. Why? I would never invest because 1, 2, 3, So these are the kind of conversations that I've been having. But yeah, so the next big step is really raising funding for the MVP and building the MVP and really having something concrete to show to B2B clients. Because while I've had initial conversations and it's always the whole sounds great, but they need to see something real, and that really takes a bit of an investment. So that's really
yeah. So becoming investor ready, getting investment, and like you said, presumably doing as many user tests as possible in the interim, right? How are you going to balance that all though? Because I'm funny enough, on the 18th of this month, which by the time this episode releases will have been and gone, because this is going to come out later in the year. I'm doing a workshop specifically on investment outreach and sales tactics as a whole, right? Outreach to get users and investment, whatever. And one of the things that I have in that presentation, that workshop, is talking about balance. There's a lot of founders I speak to that are trying to sort of do everything all at once. And as you well know, any one major task like you perform, getting user groups to come in and test, that can take up your entire time. You've got very little time to do much else. And getting investor ready is one huge task, and then actually going out and being on the raising trail is a full-time job. So how are you planning on balancing these things? Are you going to be doing them in stages to ensure that you're kind of not too overburdened, or have you got some help? Like, what's your strategy there for making sure that you don't fold under the pressure, as it were?
Yeah, it's definitely doing it in stages for sure. So I'm a sole founder. I have a CTO who will really get involved in the technical side of things. But I'm at the stage really now, on the one hand, very much speaking with people, potential co-founders and advisors. That is really the incredibly important thing to, as you know, because and really advises on the business side of things, on how to run a startup, how to push that forward, how to be successful in the fundraising campaign, but also, of course, on the neurological side of things. I've started to speak with a professor in the US who is very much a functional medicine neurologist. So these, of course, a number of people that I would love to have on my advisory board.
So I can imagine.
It's very much stage of starting to connect with people that will hopefully be on the advisory board. But yeah, everything has to happen in stages. At this stage, I cannot have everything at once. But at the same time, I have realized how far I've come from the initial idea to where things are now. It was like a million little pivots. And that is now, the initial idea was...
A friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the show and only takes a couple of minutes.
Probably fundamentally that, but it has taken me quite a long time to actually realize how would it work, what are the realities of it all. And also, so my background is certainly not being a startup founder at all. I had a little bit of, I dipped my toe in, I mean, that was not really a startup. That was jewelry design when I was very ill, because, that's what wives of investment bankers do. And so, but this is now really something where I had to organically learn so much. And also the language, of all these founder kids that use all these words that, I don't know, a year ago or more, I was just thinking, well, what are we talking about? And now it's starting to make sense, and now I can have conversations with confidence that this is what I'm going to do, and this is the reason why, as opposed to before, where when anyone would tell me something with confidence, this is what you have to do, I'd be like, okay, and so this is very much this journey, and now things are becoming more and more and more concrete, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of certainty that you get once you're within the community after a while, because it's like a subculture almost of entrepreneurialism and foundership. It's interesting. It's got its own, like you said, its own language, its own set of rules. It's it's do's and don'ts and so on. It takes a while to get, and I think it always comes back to, whenever I talk about this with any founder, speaking with more founders. Like, that's the key, isn't it? Is speak to as many founders as possible, go to networking events, meet people, like get out of the house, do stuff. But it's difficult because, again, it comes down to that balance issue of like, well, I need to do that, but I also need to build fucking startup. So it's like, so you got to do it. Are you, you're based in London, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you going to the London Startup Scene networking event this evening?
And 39.
Yeah. You are fantastic. Yeah. I'll see you there.
Last time, I love that place so much, but last time it was such a surreal noise level. I don't know if you were there as well.
I wasn't at level 39. I was at the one before, the last one, which was at, what was it called? Asarma or something like that. It was
in Southwark,
I
Bermondsey, Southwark.
I think so. But
Yeah, I was there. It was in this vault, in this kind of underground space, if that makes sense.
Maybe. No, I think, are you thinking of the one where you walk through the bookcase to go downstairs?
Yes,
that was a few months ago. That was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
No, the most recent one was at a new venue he's not been at before, which was I love it. It was multiple floors, like lots of bars, a huge stage and stuff like that. But this is back at level 39, which I've not been to because I know he's on one there before. I think it was the one before last, but I've not been there before. But it looks quite good.
Yeah, I love to speak with people, and what I've definitely learned, it's a huge learning, that the real startup founders, these are the people that are so incredibly kind, generous. They will share their knowledge, their contacts, everything. And these are the most magical people to be around. But in any networking context, there are always people that are not of that, with that vibe. They're
they're the takers, the leeches.
I've still learned to differentiate quite quickly who I'm talking to. But so I say speaking to other founders and picking up on their energy, their motivation, their inspiration is just absolutely magical.
But to be fair to the leeches in these sort of communities, I think that comes with an experience. And in fact, a lot of people entering into these networking events initially are like that to a degree, because you're kind of given this misconception about networking events. The idea is to get something out of it, right? Which you do, but not in the way that people think. So the idea is, get there, make meaningful connections, get sales, get investment. So they're in sales mode, which is to go up to people and try and be like, hey, I do this thing, like, what do would you be able to help me? And it's very much like, give me. And it's really only with experience and time do you realize what you get out of it is what you put into it. So if you're going there to offer help and to be useful and to just have a good time and be a good person, then things come to you maybe later on, but don't expect it. That's not how life works. People won't do things for you because you expect them to. They'll do them because they want to, and you have to be a good person for that to happen. That's that. So in fairness to them, I think they do often, once they go to these things more often, then you tend to notice a change in the way that they deal with it, because they realize that strategy doesn't work and no one wants to speak to them. So it changes usually pretty quick.
That's very true.
But that's great. I'll see you there, because I volunteer there. I'm a community volunteer there. So part of what I do is I go around and I speak to people. I find out how they're doing and get to know them, and I encourage them to join the Slack community, because I'm an admin there and I moderate that. And that's what I do, which is perfect for me because I love speaking to people. So he's found the ideal role for me. So I'll see you there later on. But that's great. So will you be entering into the ring to maybe pitch, to do an open mic pitch?
Not yet.
Okay.
So for my demo day with Eagle Labs, so we're perfecting the 5-minute pitch, and so that is very much for me a very exciting journey to go from, for a long time I was always like, oh no, not yet, and then at one point somebody at Eagle Labs just said, Tina, go for it. And so now I am working on my voice, my tone, and getting through material quickly enough without racing through it. And so the whole thing, and of course that's a whole group of painfully people that give feedback, which is incredibly important.
Yeah, if I could offer a piece of unsolicited, probably advice as well. I always offer this advice to founders, and I think I may have spoken about it before on previous episodes, but the best form of pitching for me personally, as an ex-angel investor, I consider myself an ex-angel investor because I'm now focused my resources on other things, but and just having been in this game for as long as I have, pitches are quite often void of narrative. And I think that is massively doing people a disservice. And you have a beautiful narrative, you have a compelling story. And to not include elements of that, I think, in a pitch is hugely detrimental to a pitch's success. Because yes, investors want to hear the numbers, the market size, the opportunity, they do. But human beings resonate with story. And human beings resonate with the hero's journey. And so to hear a story of an individual go through a journey, even if it's just the first minute of something, psychologically primes people to fall in love with the person and to relate to them and to empathize with them, so that they're hooked and they will listen to all of the boring data shit afterwards, which is the most difficult thing. So yeah, unsolicited piece of advice that you probably already knew and you're probably already doing, but just for the listeners as well out there, you know, I think that's a really important thing to do. And you don't, I don't think you need to have like a story filled full of tragedy or, you know, like, you know, ups and downs and all this kind of thing in order to be compelling. Everyone has a story. It could be as simple as someone I spoke to the other day where it was like, they said to me, there's not really a story. It was just a few of us in a WhatsApp group and we were like, hey, no one's doing this. Should we do it? And I was like, that's the story.
That's the story.
That's the story. It's like, you know, this had been on my mind for a while and we were talking about it in a group and suddenly one of us had a light bulb moment and boom, that's your story, you know? So
storytelling is definitely such a huge thing. And
absolutely.
Absolutely. I think we're being very much trained on telling a story, and of course my thing is always I had a consultation, if you will, the other day with somebody who was getting me pitch ready, and I just said, I am very happy to tell my story, but in a way I want that to be an empowering story and a quick one, and I want that to be like, oh my god, you know what I mean, because that's not who I want to be. And of course the most important thing is being an investable founder, you have to be strong in every way, strong. And of course, illness is not associated with strength. So that to me is the most important thing, to be very clear. That was my past. But now, this is me now. So yeah, it's a fine line, but I absolutely agree. The pitches that I've heard, the story is the hook. That's the thing that you remember. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it gives the opportunity to inject personality as well, which is often void in pitching, and I think that does people a massive disservice, because they're told quite often by people who coach them and things like that, you know, they just want the numbers, they want and so because of that, there's no opportunity to improvise and to let themselves come out. They're reading a memorized script, and the good thing about storytelling is you have that opportunity to inject yourself into it and your feelings and your emotions, and that comes through. And at the end of the day, people buy from people, right? So that's hugely important. And obviously there's a huge asterisk next to that, which is, as long as you're not an asshole, it works. because the problem with letting personality come through is, if you don't have a nice one, well, then don't do that. And I've seen people do that too, where like they've gone the other way, and it's like, you maybe shouldn't. You know what? Maybe be less yourself. Actually, yeah. Being yourself isn't always great in that scenario. Do you know what I mean? Like I've seen some very arrogant, egotistical people make it very clear that they're arrogant and egotistical. And it's like, okay, stick to the numbers, dude. Shut up.
I don't think that I've met an asshole founder. I don't think I've met those. I've
met loads.
Possibly they were kind of a much later stage, possibly already exited, starting to talk about their Lamborghinis and stuff. That of course, but I think the actual ones that are really at a stage to get stuff off the ground, they are. I've noticed very often, and that's a classic thing, to be much too not enough confidence. I mean, in my incubator, there's one very young girl who has developed something incredibly cool, and when we did our first pitch competition online, and she was just like, you know, and we're all like,
speak up.
Imagine you're an 18-year-old male, and then now talk about your thing, you know. So she was just so understated and so and the questions afterwards were like, so what is your business? And then she kind of carefully mentioned all the customers and clients she already has on board, and it was just the whole over like 15 people, and we're like, what's happening here, so I think that might come back to possibly the male versus female way of pitching, and then of course the male versus female being able to raise funding. That's a whole, I mean, I'm not gender obsessed in that way, but I find it very interesting to
It
observe.
is interesting. Yeah, I mean, look, men generally are, they do have and again, generally are, they tend to have a little bit more comfortable speaking in front of audiences, and they're not as averse to confrontation as women. Women tend to be more risk averse and confrontation averse, which is, I think, a fairly well accepted sort of thing within the differences between male and female psychology and biology. But it's true that there is, for a lot of first-time founders, there's a confidence issue. But I always remember what a friend of mine and a guest of mine on last season, Ewan Moran, mentioned. He's a founder of Barback. He mentioned that he believes you need to have a certain amount of arrogance, really, to be a founder, because essentially what you're saying as a founder is, I know how to do this better, right? And especially if you're going into an established industry, you're not just saying that to yourself, you're saying that to a whole industry. And in some ways, that's what you're doing. You're saying to the medical industry, you're not doing a very good job. This whole industry that's been built over hundreds of years, like, you're not doing a good enough job here. I know how to do this better. And so that there is a certain level of inherent arrogance in innovation, which is to say, there is a better way of doing this and you're not doing it. And I know what it is. But you just need to toe that line to make sure it doesn't come across in certain ways. And the arsehole founders that I can think of were arrogant in ways beyond just that. That, it was every part of how they operated as a human being and running a business, which was, I know better than you on every single level. And it's like, well, I can't work with someone who's employed me to do something very specific as an expert and then telling me that they know how to do it better when they've never done this before and I have. That's like, okay, you are just an arsehole. So there are some people who think they're innovators in everything, and so they're like, well, I want to rip apart everything to do with how to run a business. And it's like, no, dude, like, you're an innovator in this one thing, stay in your lane. Like, there are sort of some things that just need to be done a certain way. You're not going to be able to build a business like by saying you want to be a socialist company in a capitalistic society, for example. You know what I mean? It just won't work. So they do exist, but thankfully they're few and far between. Although someone did recently post online about that there's apparently some science, some studies to back up the fact that the vast majority of entrepreneurs and founders are susceptible to sociopathic tendencies. Which is interesting, because I suppose a certain amount of sociopathic tendencies is a healthy. You can have be a functioning sociopath, you know what I mean, or a functioning psychopath, which maybe we are.
As long as it's not a narcissistic personality disorder, then I think exactly go a little bit far. But I absolutely agree. I mean, after all, we have to be convinced that whatever we've come up with is an amazingly great thing, and then we want other people to invest their hard-earned money in it. And so with that definitely that needs confidence and really belief in it. And as you say, it is a very fine line to not turn into I know everything better than you, but also, and I think, and that is something that probably quite a few people have, is letting go of control, as in, I know better. This thing of, unless you do it yourself, it's not going to be done right. So this thinking so many people have, and of course, in a context where something is your baby, then to give at least part of it into somebody else's hands, as in, now you will take care of half of my baby. That is of course a hard thing to do.
It is very hard. I've worked with a lot of founders who have raised Series A, and in fact Series A is the most difficult period for them, because following that money landing in the bank, and then suddenly they have a hiring team and they've got recruiters. They don't even need to be involved in the hiring process anymore, and their team's growing without them. that can be very alienating. And a lot of founders I work with needs, actually the relationship dynamic between me and them changes more from advisor to coach in that moment, because they need more emotional support rather than strategic support actually. Yeah, because they feel secluded from their own business. They feel it's growing without them. It's like their kid going to college, you know.
You don't need me anymore.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's like, oh, they grow up so quick, you know, I've been abandoned, what do I do? But of course what it means is just their job has changed. It doesn't mean that they're gone. In the same way that when your kid goes to college, your parenting job has changed. It doesn't mean you stop being a parent. You're still needed, just in a different way. And it's a lot more distance, where you're now distance parenting in the same way that you're now distance leadership, and your responsibility set has changed, and now you can focus on different things. So it's very interesting. I end up becoming more of a therapist than a strategic commercial advisor at that point. But it's been a while actually since I've been in that position. I haven't worked with a couple Series A founders for a little while. So anyone listening out there who is, give me a shout. But look, we are coming to the end. So something I normally do towards the end is ask for my guests to give some tips to founders, in relation to anyone who's maybe going through a similar journey to you. But I want to do something a little different, which is because we've already kind of touched on that in a way to a degree just now, but also because of given what you're doing, I think it would be interesting to hear what you would say are some of your biggest tips for that you could maybe pass out there for those wanting to make changes in their lifestyle to improve cognitive or brain health. You've touched on a few already, but are there any others that you would maybe, in the next couple of minutes, you do want to put out there, or maybe not necessarily even changes, but things for maybe to go and read, to look at, to explore?
Possibly one very big thing is to change the mindset, really, to think, if I'm not feeling well, to listen to myself first before I ask somebody else how I am. So that's probably the biggest thing, to trust yourself, to trust your own body, to listen to your body. I think that is probably mindset wise the most important thing. And otherwise, my vitamin D obsession will never stop. So anyone I would advise to get themselves tested, ideally with a private lab, because they will actually give you the level, as opposed to the GP guys will just say like, it's fine. That is bottom of okay, but we need to aim much higher. And in terms of nutrition, possibly again mindset change. Don't think that things that are good for the brain will taste bad. Quite the opposite. Just look into what is actually truly brain healthy, not as listed by the NHS, CDC, FDA, or any of those organizations.
Or like fad stuff like you get on TikTok and things like that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So really just a few fundamentals about omega-3, olive oils, and all that, and to think that food that makes you feel good is actually the magical food, the true treat, as opposed to I'm going to treat myself with a beer and a Snickers. That is a very short-term approach to treat. So that's probably the most important change I've made for myself, to view things that make me feel good as a true treat that I'm looking forward to more than anything. High quality olive oil, that to me, that is my obsession.
I'm the same. So I spend more money, I think, on good quality olive oil than any other sort of condiment, I guess, or staple product in my pantry. I think that's the most. Two very last quick questions then for you to answer before I let you go. Then, in relation to getting tested for vitamin D clinics, do you have a recommendation as to what clinic in the UK you can use? Is it something that can be done online?
There's a lab that I've been using for a long time by now, because I take high levels and I'm aiming for a very high level, and that lab is called Medichecks, and they have a very simple concept. You leave a blood sample, like a finger prick blood sample, and you send it to them, and within 3-4 days they send you the results online.
Right.
And that is usually 35 pounds or something. And
Okay.
so that is an investment that is worth more than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you be able to send me a link to them via LinkedIn for that? And I can put it in the description of this video along with your website and everything else. I'll put it all in the description.
I should ask those guys to really give me some. By now, I've told.
Yeah, you can a referral program or something. Yeah. Yes. And the last quick question I have, because again related to what you just said there, was you mentioned about doing your research beyond things that like the NHS say, or like I pointed out, like fad recommendations. Where is a good source of truth, in your opinion, on this kind of information? Because it's very difficult to know where to go.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And of course, anything that is the truth is always like, well, is it though?
What was a reliable enough source of information, would you say?
There are a few neurologists that I follow that some of them have podcasts, some have books. I'll just send you those links.
Yeah, if you could, that would be great. I can include those in the description too.
Yeah.
Because I think people listening to this will be interested to want to know more, and it's just difficult to navigate Google for stuff like this. And when you want to look at medical papers, especially, it's very difficult because a lot of them are private, and you have to be part of an institution to get access to them. And there's a whole thing. And then plus reading them is difficult as well.
No, that's not something. Yeah.
Well, look. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot from this conversation, like I always do, and it's lovely seeing you again, and I'm really excited for everything you're doing. Hopefully I'll see you later anyway. I mean, I know these things can get a bit crazy. There's been a lot of times I've said that. I've been there at the same time as other people, and we just didn't see each other. Yeah. But hopefully I'll catch up with you later anyway. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful discussion, and we'll definitely have to do a part 2 at some point in the near future.
I'd love to. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Well, have a lovely day, and I'll see you later on.
All right.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening and/or watching. Please like and subscribe and join in the conversation in the comments below.